welcome Lee Ault.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This evening's talk is called Ration Fashion, or Fashion by Government Order. It's what you could and couldn't have during the years of the Second World War. Now, to be properly dressed at this time, of course, you needed your coat, your costume, your hat, your gloves, your shoes, and your bag. Now, the coat that I'm actually wearing this evening was actually made in 1947. War, officially, was over, but it was, if any of you remember it, the coldest winter on record. And in history books, it's often referred to as the Shinwell winter. Well, Emmanuel Shinwell was a government minister. They had to blame somebody, so they blamed him. Not that he could have done anything about it. So it's a lovely piece of Welsh wool. Now, underneath it, I'm wearing a CC41 Hardy Amis costume, which is why the microphone doesn't fit very well into the pockets, because it's got wartime pockets. It's closed by government order. When the CC41 came out, you were restricted as to the length of the skirt, 15 inches from the floor, the turn-in on the hem, the turn-ins on the seams, and the amount of buttons you were allowed was 5. So this complies with all government regulations. It is also lined with silk. But it is Hardy Amis. Now, of course, you've got your hat, and hats didn't come under the CC41 label. You probably know it better as utility label, because there was so little fabric in all the hats, and you could make them out of anything, including wood shavings and artificial fruit. Gloves did come under the CC41 label, and so did bags and shoes. Inside your bag, you would have some very necessary little items. First of all, you would have rather an interesting little green book, which is your National Registration Identity Card. And if you moved around, you got it stamped on the back. Do go without it, just don't go without it, and don't leave it at home, don't lose it, because you would be restricted. Now also, the government started, well before the war, preparing for what they knew was coming. And very soon, your ration book was going to be issued to you. This was for your food ration, these interesting little buff books. And the back page was going to be for margarine coupons. Some of you might know what wartime margarine was made out of. But they didn't use it straight away, and so they were going to use them for your first clothing coupons. However, they were very fast off the mark, and very soon you were going to get lovely little pink clothing coupon books, full of lovely little coloured coupons in scarlet and lime and fuchsia and all different colours. So they're your clothing coupon books, things to keep safe. And then, of course, if you had the right to use a car or a motorcycle, you would need your petrol coupons, like gold dust suppers. So they were things to keep in your bag. Your other item that you would have with you was a very elegant accessory indeed. It was a cardboard box with a string handle. You could have it covered to match your outfit, but most people didn't bother. So the cardboard box was actually your gas mask. This is a civilian gas mask, and you would go to your local sort of hall, and you would have instructions on when and how to use it. And they're wonderful things. Guaranteed to mess up the hair, doesn't do much for the makeup, and of course, I soon found out when I gave this talk to the Imperial War Museum, they wouldn't have really hacked you in a gas attack either. Because I wanted to know what was inside them. And the people that made them, that worked in the factories, sign the Official Secrets Act, and they weren't to disclose what was actually in them. There is nothing very lethal in them, although do advise not wearing them for fun. They have charcoal and feathers inside, that's what they contain. And you have this wonderful smell of rubber, which flaps up and down on your cheeks. So very elegant gas masks. They come in many different types, but that's a general civilian one. If you were a child at school, of course, you had to have a gas mask. This is your children's gas mask. You also had to have one if you had a baby in the house, and they came in a big box, and you put the whole baby in it apart from its legs, and the instruction on the box said to put your own gas mask on first before you put the baby into his, because you need to make sure you're safe, and then you can pump up and down on the hammer with the babies. But this is what you had if you were at school. I think this is probably even more scary than the other one. This is your Mickey Mouse gas mask. And it's sort of like goggle-eyed. But when you breathe, the little nose goes up and down because there's a little air hole in there for it. So that's the children's Mickey Mouse gas mask. Now, you were being prepared 18 months before war broke out. Posters started appearing everywhere, and lots of information. And some of these amazing posters, which are now very collectible, are beautiful works of art. Well, as you can see, we've got a lovely lady there. We've got some officers from the forces. Keep mum, she's not so dumb. Careless talk costs lives. And try this one after a glass of sherry. Loose lips sink ships. What they were telling you is don't gossip. She might not look dangerous, but she might just be passing on information. So that's your poster. Also, of course, here's the pattern for the coat. It's a butterlip pattern and it costs 2 shillings. So that's the coat pattern. You would have to prepare your home. So you went down to your local drapery store or haberdasher's and you brought your blackout curtain. It's this wonderful fabric which never seems to rot, and also came in a lovely shade of sludge green. Now you hung this against the windows. You can have your pretty curtains on the inside, but of course it was illegal to show light in the night because it might guide the aircraft in. And so there's your blackout curtain. And as I say, it seems to be a fabric that goes on and on forever. You are then going to be issued with lots of instructions. And here we have the Daily Telegraph. And it says, Great Britain at war, the King's message to the Empire. And that's the Daily Telegraph from the day war broke out. And with that, of course, information. You would have found this in all your village halls, your council buildings, post offices. What to do if the invader comes, what to do and how to do it. Basically, do not run away. You are supposed to keep watch, and if you see anything suspicious, note it carefully and report it either to the police or the military, but don't rush around spreading vague rumours. And one of the last little sentences on here, it says, think before you act, but think always of your country before you think of yourselves. So that's your what to do if the invader comes. And then, of course, you could do something very useful. You could smoke. This is when they thought smoking was good for you. Well, you could collect coupons in cigarette packets and go on a healthy hiking, cycling or camping holiday and stay at the hostels. Or you could collect the cigarette cards, which also came in the cigarette packets. And this one is all about ARP wardens and what to do in a gas attack, how to put fires out, basic first aid, they're all in there. So by the time you've smoked yourself to death, you could actually take your ARP warnings and digest them. Now, the Daily Sketch, this is the page from the Daily Sketch. It's got a wonderful article here about RAF pilots, but on this side it's got a note from the Milk Marketing Board, and it says on here, reminders to the public, and there's 6 reminders. And number 4 is for mothers and others who have children in their care, and they should see that these children are on the milk roll at school. The government scheme, mid-morning milk, costs a halfpenny a day. Those were those little bottles that had ice on them in the winter and had that really quite funny taste in the summer. Well, in 1908, a garment was manufactured by Symington's, the corset manufacturers of Leicestershire, and you were going to be very grateful for it. It was going to see you through the First World War, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, right up till 1974 when they actually stopped making it. But the first little girl that ever wore one was this little girl here. Her name was Frida Cox, and the reason she got to wear the very first Liberty bodies, and it was called a Liberty bodies because it gave you liberty to work and play, was because she was the granddaughter of the managing director of Symington's. Now there were several different styles, all either natural colour or white, fleecy lined or unfleecy lined, but they were all this knitted fabric with tape seams. Just in case you never wore one. I didn't have one yet. We have a Liberty bodies. The very first ones had bone buttons on them, but they soon realised that bone buttons couldn't be put through a copper, boiled up and then mangled. So thanks to Mr. John Boyd Dunlop, you had rubber buttons on your Liberty bodies. And it was rubber buttons, boiled and mangled, that if you had them under your nose all day at school, you would never forget the smell. Or you could have them buttoned down the front, buttoned down the back. You could have them with or without suspenders. You could have buttons around the waist to button your knickers to. There were many different styles. But of course, people were still getting married. And the lady that wore this wedding dress was married in October 1939, about a month after the war broke out. It's a lovely rayon brocade dress, and it's one of those nice clingy dresses, but it's still in the 30s style, and it looks much better on than it does just hanging up. But it had a 4-foot tray, because at this point there wasn't any rationing. If you could find it, you could afford it, you could buy it. But by 1942, she'd got her first babe, and clothes rationing had been in for a year. So she actually cut the train off the dress and made the christening gown. So there's the christening gown. Well, things were going to get harder. We have here the little booklet of the outbreak of war speeches. We've got one in here from the King. We've got one from the President of the Polish nation, and also the one from Neville Chamberlain, where he told you it wasn't going to happen. And then this was published. June the 1st, 1941. This was going to tell you exactly how many coupons you were going to be allowed to have your wardrobe full of clothes. Well, first of all, this was issued by the Board of Trade. They were going to give you 66 coupons, which was far too many. You were going to be much too rash with that. You had far too many clothes. By the time war ended, you were down to just over 40 coupons. As well as coupons, of course, you had to have ready money to go with them. So it wasn't that easy. Now, it's listed down here as men and boys and women and girls. And the first item on each list is a Macintosh. Well, for a man, it's 9. For a boy, it was 7. For a lady, it was 14. And for a girl, it was 11. Don't worry, we were going to get our own back a little later. It goes right the way down the list till you get to slippers and socks and things. And and then there were some things that were actually exempt. So this is your civilian clothing control, which is what CC41 actually stands for, not June 1941. Affectionately known as the utility mark, and the jacket of this costume has actually got the utility mark just on the inside. And this is what you're going to find. All your household linen, yes, on all your clothing, and of course if you've got CC41 furniture, it's still going strong because it's absolutely indestructible, beautifully made, and the only way you can actually get rid of it is to either chop it up or put it on a bonfire, but it will come back in fashion, so keep it. So this is your utility mark. Now, everything you wore was going to be designed, first of all, by top designers. The government had 7 of them working on the first clothes to bear this label. Hardy Amis, Norman Hartnell, Creed and Modern New were amongst them. So you really could go down to your local high street and buy a Hardy Amis or a Norman Hartnell outfit, in theory. Now, if you had more money than anybody else, you could actually buy your clothes with this mark in it. It is a utility mark, but it's a superior utility mark. It looks like a place setting, but it just meant that the clothes with this mark in it cost an awful lot more than the ordinary ones. So they're your 2 utility marks. You're going to get some help. On your wireless, in your magazines, you had Mrs. So-and-so, and she was going to tell you how to make things out of just about anything you had, really, and give you ideas about salvage. It wasn't called recycling, it was called salvage. And then, of course, you have make, do, and mend. Unpick unwearable garments completely and salvage every inch. Make up together only materials that require the same cleaning and washing. And you've got whole pages like this in magazines and newspapers. And then the government actually published the book, Make, Do and Mend. They didn't give them to you, they cost 3pence halfpenny. And inside it's got lovely sayings like, renovation saves the nation. And it tells you everything about how to darn your stockings. Should you not be allowed to wear metal, if you worked in something like a munitions factory, and you had to take the metal off your suspenders, you could have a piece of string with a bone button to keep your stockings up. Oh, all sorts of things. And taking 2 garments and making one useful one out of it. All sorts of ideas in there. Very, very interesting. But of course, if you were going to join the forces, you did not need coupons for your uniform. This is a pair of army-issued shorts. They were actually issued in 1942, and the gentleman that had the others that went with them still uses one pair of them when he does his gardening. So it just tells you how very well made they are. So there's your hot weather army-issue shorts. Sturdy things. If you were a lady and you joined the Air Force, officers were issued with these wonderful, lovely wool scarves. This is an officer's scarf, a piece of wool. And if you joined the Wrens, you had these wonderful hats. This is a lovely Wren's officer's hat. Actually belonged to the senior Wren officer at Bletchley Park. So that's a beautifully made hat. And of course, everybody had to do something towards the war effort. Very few people escaped doing absolutely nothing. And you could belong to the ARP. And here is an ARP Walden skirt. It came with trousers as well and a battle dress top. And I can see by the skirt it's completely unworn. probably only worn a couple of times. It's made of really sturdy blue serge. As this lady obviously knows, when you wear it, it's very scratchy. It's like wearing barbed wire. So I suspect that's probably why she didn't wear the skirt. Apart from it being short, it would have been rather drafty. She obviously wore the trousers a lot more than the skirt. So there's those. Now, of course, if you join the army, the colour was khaki. Well, these are army issue stockings. Aren't they attractive? The Wrens, of course, had almost black, and the ladies in the Air Force had that lovely sort of slatey Air Force blue. But you know when you've got army issue or you've got government issue, because they don't come with CC41 marks. They come with lovely little arrows on them. And the date of issue. And these, you can see the arrow probably better on that one. And these were actually issued in 1939. And complete with the drawers that went with them in the same colour. They were affectionately known as donkey droppers. I'm assured it's the colour. The Wrens were called blackouts, and twilights the ladies in the Air Force. All due to the colour. So there's your lovely Lisle stockings. Now, if you were in civilian life, of course, you would still need stockings. You could, if you knew where to find them, still buy silk stockings, but of course they were extremely rare and very expensive. But Lisle stockings were useful. Now, I suspect probably if some of you were at school, you might have had Lisle school stockings. Well, when you put them on, you think, don't they look nice? Then you bend your leg and the stocking stays bent. It doesn't go back into shape. So you keep pulling them up and they go further and further up. Then all of a sudden they all wrinkle round the ankles. They're your Lisle stockings. And of course if you sent everything to the laundry, you had to put a name label in them. So that's something else they remind you about in Blue Men. Well, you could, of course, have rayon stockings. And this is a lovely pair of elite rayon, fully fashioned stockings. It's got this lovely, fully fashioned heel and this lovely dark seam down the back. And you probably would get these from the little chap that disappeared when the policeman turned up. He would have a suitcase full of these. So they're your rayon stockings. Rayon is made of spruce chips. It was called Ault silk in the 19th century, but it's a nice, and it does stay to the shape of the leg. But of course something wonderful happened in May 1939. Nylon stockings went on sale in New York. They were made of what they called glass nylon, invented by 3 chemists. One was a German chemist who got lost in the mist of time. The other was an English chemist, but the most famous one was Wallace Carruthers, who worked for DuPont's. Strangely enough, they didn't actually make nylon for ladies' nylon stockings. It was a byproduct. But glass nylon, when they made them, was indestructible, so they had to build in a destruct factor. Otherwise, you'd still be wearing your granny's nylons. Now, by 1941, we were actually making nylons in this country. And this is one of the first pairs of British nylon stockings, complete with their CC41 mark on them. But when the Americans came over here, it was said they came over here, they were oversexed, overpaid, with pockets full of nylon stockings, which they swapped for hospitality. I've really got to find out what that one's all about. So they're your nylon stockings. Now, of course, if you couldn't get your stockings, or you ladded them, it was a catastrophe. You couldn't end them, of course. And in here we've got troubles are ended when they are mended, and it's everything you need from mending your woolen stockings to your nylon stockings in there. And you might well need one of these. It's a little egg-shaped piece of wood, and it's got a ridge up there and a little hook there, and you just hook up the ladder so you can invisibly mend your stockings. Of course, if you had some money, you could take it down to the cleaners when the invisible render is down there. But that will cost money. On your feet, you might want to need shoes. Now this is when wedges came in for the first time. But the difference between those and the ones you find today, these have actually got wooden soles. They're not flexible at all. So you've got nice, firm wooden wedges. These were actually made by the grandfather of the chap that brought them back a couple of years ago. So they're your wedges. And of course, when you've worn them a couple of times, you would have them soled again so that you could keep them going for a long, long time. Just keep taking the sole off and renewing it. And put in blakies in the toes and heels. Yeah. So they made a nice little tapping sound when you walked along. But of course, you could also have some wonderful shoes like this. These are CC41 shoes. You could wear them today, they're beautiful. These are evening shoes. And on the sole, they've still got the remnants of their CC41 mark. Because of course she didn't have them resoled, she wanted them nice and slippy for her ballroom dancing. Well, you'd need some undies, ladies, so would the gentlemen. And you could go into Marks and Spencer's. Remember when Marks and Spencer's brand name wasn't Poruno or Autograph, it was St Michael and St Margaret? Well, these are St Michael. These are your, well, they're directoires, really, is their proper name, drawers. And they all come complete with their CC41 labels. Now, they have many names. They've been called wrist breakers, finger snappers, passion killers. They have many other names which are quite rude. The gentleman would know why. But my grandmother used to call them harvest knickers because all was safely gathered in. Well, they're your nice sort of cotton knitted ones. But of course you could have them made out of that wonderful fabric made by Coulthard's British Salonese. Well, these are still your wartime, lovely 41 label. But you had to be really careful with Salonese because if you iron it with the wrong temperature, it changes colour. And apparently little boys used to see them on the washing line and think that they were barrage balloons. But that's your CC41 drawers. If you were fashionable, of course, you wouldn't wear those. You would have these. These are your French knickers. Well, by the time you've got a short skirt and you've got your stockings getting shorter and shorter, the gap between there and these nice drafty legs was called a taxi teaser or a giggle gap. Well, French knickers, all that's between you and none at all is button. So if you were sensible, you actually carried safety pins with you. But French knickers were often referred to in newspaper cartoons as utility knickers, and they were often worn by that wonderful cartoon character Jane in the cartoon strip. If she didn't have these on, she had her cami knickers on, and on D-Day she appeared stark naked for the one and only time. Well, these also had another name. They were called American knickers because one yank and they were down. Now the thing about the utility mark was that everything that was made bearing that mark had to be of a really good quality. It was made to last. And this is the petticoat that actually went with the French knickers. Beautifully made, and a lot of the stuff was still being hand finished. So that's your utility petticoat. Now, when you go into Marks and Spencer's or your local lingerie store, you see your bras in A's, B's, double this, treble that. They're jello-filled, water-filled, they've got uplift, downlift, cleavage and balcony, they've got all sorts of names. Well, when I worked in the rag trade, We called them egg cups, tea cups, breakfast cups, and challenge cups. And a friend of mine, it's nearly always men that design ladies' bras because it's to do with a civil engineering cantilever principle. And he worked for Burley. And he said that on the shop floor there, they were known as ping pong, ding dong, and holy cow. But this is a wartime bra. And it's based on the triangles as designed by Mary Phelps Jacobs, who actually marketed it as Crest Crosby. And this is the famous wartime Kestos bra. So as you can see, it's not got much uplift or downlift or anything. And this is army issue. This was issued to the same lady that had the army stockings. And of course it's got the little arrows on the inside telling you when it was issued. And known affectionately by the ladies that wore them as hammocks. So that's your bra. Now, should you want to make your own underwear, here we have a Weldon's pattern for 1 threepence to make your cami knickers with. And they have to comply, anybody making your clothes, with government restriction orders. And they're all printed on the patterns. And here's your cami knickers. And those of you that have worn them will know that they are some of the most comfortable undergarments to wear. They are a little drafty, but they're very comfortable to wear. So they're your wartime cami knickers. You wouldn't think they were wartime because they're beautifully made and hand finished, but there you go. Now, of course, if you want corsetry, Burley never made any during the war. They continued to advertise, but their entire factory was actually taken over for the essential war work. But my lady corsetry did continue making corsets. And in this box we have, in pink corteil, and then we have a beautiful example of the CC41 and its patent number. There's very little elastic in it, and there's tiny hooks and eyes. And of course you wouldn't be allowed to wear this if you worked in a munitions factory because it's got a lot of metal on it, and you might just blow the whole thing up, including half the neighbourhood. Now you could buy a pattern, and this one is one of these patterns for government restriction orders, and this one will actually make this blouse. Now this blouse is made out of parachute silk because first of all it was illegal to have parachutes. If you found them you were supposed to give them in, and then the government published this article in the Sunday Express. The Sunday Express called it Silk Undies Without Coupons, and they actually lay out the panels of a parachute so that you can make 2 night dresses and all the rest you can put together to make some French knickers. Well, it says in that article that one of the best buys at the moment is a parachute, either of silk or nylon. Silk parachutes are more difficult to find, but they're worth the hunt. Prices vary from £7 to 10 shillings. You were lucky if you were earning £2 10 shillings a week, and that was for not silk. But if you found a silk one, it was 16 guineas. But what you were getting was 80 yards of silk. Now, many shops were selling panels at 6 and 8 pence or 7 and 10 pence, enough to make 2 night dresses. And I didn't bring the whole parachute, but I brought a bit of one, because the whole parachute would just about cover this room. And if you were the unlucky one, you were the one that got the initials which do not come out. It doesn't matter how much you wash it, it doesn't come out. But it's absolutely wonderful silk. And of course nylon was going to be used for parachutes, but they realised that in a burning plane, nylon welds together. So they carried on making silk parachutes to bring men down, but the nylon ones were going to be used for supply drop parachutes. And in here we have the illustrated book of World War II. They're all the pictures taken during the war, but published just afterwards, because not only are they in colour, but a lot of the pictures were very sensitive. Now here we have the land girls at work, and you've got the girls in their land army uniforms bringing in the harvest, and in this side you've got the inside of a parachute factory. There's got a white parachute in sight. What they're making are supply drop parachutes. They're red and orange and blue and green and yellow, all different colours. And it says in the article, May 1944, each worker has 80 yards of gaily coloured fabric to fashion into a parachute. A supply drop parachute is made of 140 separate pieces. And they need tables 40 foot long to actually fold the parachutes on. So you've got 80 yards of nylon if you buy a coloured one, or 80 yards of silk for 16 guineas if you buy a white silk parachute. Now, your information for your fashion, Vogue was still publishing, it published Wartime Vogue, but the sort of News of the World used to publish every Sunday the latest fashions. And this is the fashions from the News of the World. And here we have wonderful prices, 29 and 5p, 31 and a penny, and we've got 28 and 11p. And the little dress in the middle there, which is 29 and 9p, I just happen to have one of. And mine's pink, and it's been made, do and mended many times. It's got darns all over it. And it's been trimmed with a bit of green to give it another lease of life. And because my great aunt was tall, she took the whole hem down and just put green binding around the hem. Otherwise it would have been almost like a mini dress on her. So that one's there. Now one of the first ones that actually came off the production line was a dress from Norman Hartnell. And they kept it because they thought it was a very iconic dress. The rest of them, they were all sold. But this one was given to the Victoria and Albert Museum. From time to time, you can still actually see it. So there's that wonderful dress. And the Daily Express said that the ideal skirt should be like a good speech. Long enough to cover the essential parts, but short enough to be interesting. I think there's many a government minister who would take that. And that dress was made in the wonderful colour of maroon. And as you will see, it's this wonderful crepe fabric, and it's got shoulder pads in it, because we'd had shoulder pads since 1936 when we were squaring up to what was coming. So it looks wonderful. It's actually got some lovely work in it. They're beautifully made and they do fit beautiful, but there's so little material in them. It's just the cleverness of the cut. And this one is another crepe dress, and the lady that made this one, she's actually cut out the yoke, she's put some net behind it, and then she's put some of the fabric back as flowers, and then made herself a little brooch with some feathers and a gold safety pin. So this was one of the many things that you could sit and do, because of course they'd taken your television away from you. You'd only just got it, and if you could have afforded it, you were just getting used to it, and then they took it away again. So you had to rely on your wireless. Now, with your clothes, of course, it said that most of the wartime winters were very cold. You might just need your little fur cape. Nice bit of rabbit there. Sounds posher if you call it combing. And then, of course, you could go out and buy an economy pattern. Now, this one actually tells you to look in the gentleman's wardrobe. Bearing in mind he probably hasn't got any choice in the matter because he's probably not there to argue. And it tells you to take a shirt, unpick it, and from that you can make this lovely blouse. They also tell you that cricket flannels make nice skirts, grey flannels can be used for school uniforms, and you can use blankets to make coats out of. So everything was up for grabs. Look, I particularly like the colour of this shirt, but there you go, it's better than nothing at all. We have one gentleman's shirt. Nice CC41 mark in there. The only thing they never found a use for, but give them time and they probably would have done, would have been the detached collar. If you actually unpicked it, because it's a nice piece of cotton in there, and took all the starch out, you'd probably get a nice piece of fabric you could make a decorative collar for a summer dress with, but they didn't actually think of that. So the collar was not used. But one lady whose husband was in the Navy, he came home on leave and he was going to take her out for an anniversary treat. She had nothing to wear, so she made this dress. Then she made this jacket to go with it, so she had a nice little outfit. She actually wore that fur cape with it when she went out. And when he came out of the Navy in the late 50s, he looked for his dressing gown. This was his dressing gown. He hadn't realised he'd been taking it dancing and dining. So that was it. Now, of course, you needed lots of help. And Vogue continued printing. This is Vogue's book of smart dressmaking, wartime. And inside it says a message from the Board of Trade. There you can see Marshall Fabrics advertisement with their CC41 mark on there. And you've got all, the inside is not coloured, it's just black and white. And then there's this little article, and it says, the Board of Trade urge you to mend and make do. Look in your wardrobe. A hint sent in by a reader says that adult woolen vests make nice winter knickers and petticoats for small children. And it also tells you how to take odd bits of fabric and make little bows with just little gold safety pins to go inside the neck of your costume, and bits of braid on a piece of net to make a collar to go on your dress. All these useful things in that book. Also tells you how to make an old blouse into a nice modern 1940s blouse. So that's you can see how short it is. Yes. Well, lots of ideas. Of course, if you wanted to cover your deck chair, the best thing to buy for £1 was an old windsock. If you've ever wondered why so many old deck chairs were covered in orange, that's because they were covered in an old windsock. Now, this little book here is called Useful Things and Helpful Hints. And in here you've got scraps of leather made into belts. You've got gentlemen's ties opened up to make sort of false fronts for suits. Scarves made into waistcoats. Just about everything in here that you need. Also, it tells you to take your milk bottle tops. These are the cardboard milk bottle tops. The ones that had the biddles that you pushed out. Now, of course, you could make pom-poms out of them, or you could wind them round with garden raffia and make these little bags. You can make bigger ones, of course, but this is just a nice little bag. It's just had some cotton to line it with. So a nice little shopping bag from milk bottle tops. Now, what are you going to do about food? Well, of course, you're on the most wonderful diet you've ever been on. You certainly weren't going to get fat on wartime food. Ambrose Heath kitchen front recipes and hints in there. Then we have McDoodles, what to give them. Everything in here, well, it's just stodge, really. Mind you, it does have some rather inventive things in here. Smoked fish pie, herring and potato pie. There's an awful lot of flour in them as well. Fruit and vegetable preserving and wartime gardening. This is when they ask you to dig up your lawns and flower borders and plant vegetables and things to grow. And then this book, Food Facts for the Kitchen Front. It's been much used. And in here we have that wonderful recipe for Lord Wootton's pie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you thought that the next mouthful's got to have some meat in it. There's also a lovely recipe in here for parsnip pie. And there's one for apricot pie, which is not made of apricots at all. It's actually made of carrots. It's all in the mind, it's like. Now, of course, you might want to do some washing. So we have wartime rinso, threepence halfpenny. And it says on here, no boiling needed. Saves time, work and fuel. Makes clothes last longer and does your washing up too. And here is your blue bag. Wicket's blue. And a nice little brown paper parcel. And to keep your expensive clothes nice and clean, you want your wraparound pinny. Well, these come in nice bright colours made of nice quality cotton, but they would have cost you 2 coupons as well as money. So that's your wraparound pinny. And this one has never been undone. It's just as it was bought. And it was bought in a sale. It was still 2 coupons, but in the sale it actually cost a shilling. Sale price. So there's your sale wraparound pin. If you wanted your hair done, of course, well, you could have been brave and gone to the hairdressers, but should you have been put in one of those space machines when they dried your hair, with the sort of curlers coming out, if there was an air raid, they're just sort of, well, how are they going to get you out? It took a long time to put them in. But you could, of course, have your curling irons. Marcel invented these in the late 1800s to crimp his mother's hair and made himself a fortune. But of course you just stick these in the fire or on the stove, make sure that they're not too hot, put some paper on your hair and curl your hair. Well, you did need some setting lotion sometimes with them, and then you had these wavers. And you could set your hair into nice waves down the side. You could have dinky curlers, but if you wanted a new sort of fashionable hairstyle, following the screen, sort of stars of the silver screen, you would want to sleep in pipe cleaners because they were comfortable and you could get a good night's sleep in those. And to cover them all up, because you might want to go to work when you've got your curlers in, you might want to wear your headscarf. Now this is a very, very upmarket CC41 Liberty's headscarf, made of silk. Now you could wear it like the Queen wears hers, tied on her chin in a knot. But in 1939, a film came to England and stayed the entire length of the war, and it made another way of wearing the headscarf fashionable. You put it on back to front, and you tie it up, and you turn the back, and you've got a turban. Or you could wear your hair up under there, you could keep it out of the machinery when you went to work. So the turban became fashionable. The film was Gone with the Wind, and in it Scarlett O'Hara's mammy wore a turban. Now, of course, you could have a hairnet. You could have snoods, which you could crochet or knit. You could have these little rayon hairnets. No nylon hairnets yet, but you still could get hairnets made of hand-knotted human hair. If you wanted to pay tuppence halfpenny each for them. They have been sterilised, it says on the outside. Now, of course, no rubber gloves, because all rubber was being used for Central War work. So if you wanted to keep your hands nice, you needed some hand lotion. And this is Espitio hand lotion. It's simply essence of violets. And that's its original advertisement there from the Daily Sketch, along with other interesting things. And that was one of those Backintoshes from Pontins for 10 shillings and 11 pence that was going to cost you 14 coupons. And in this advertisement, they did want to stop the manufacture of makeup during the war. Then they realised that if they wanted women to work, women wanted to look good. So they carried on making makeup, and they actually gave you makeup rooms in factories, so you could put it on if you hadn't had time. And in the papers, they actually printed things to do, how to make your makeup last longer. This one's called powder points. Well, you had Coty and Pond's. Here we have the Snowfire and Elfrida. And of course, Woolworths was a wonderful source of cheap makeup. And they had a lovely lipstick in there called Tangerine. And every woman that wore it, it came out a different colour, depending on the oils of your skin. And when you'd finished with the tube, you dug out the little bit at the bottom, and you collected all these little bits, and you melted it down, and had a new lipstick. Now, your Christmas cards were very exciting. They were made from salvage paper. You could get coloured ones, but they were quite expensive. But most of all, they come in a single colour. You have black ones, green ones, red ones, blue ones, and they've got an odd assortment of ill-fitting envelopes to go with them. So they're your salvage paper wartime Christmas cards. Now, those of you that knit, you could do woolies for the RAF. Everything from knee warmers to wrist warmers and balaclavas. Then we have Jaeger's Essential for the Forces. All sorts of things for sort of scarves and waistcoats for ladies and gentlemen in the forces. And then we have Best Ways Wartime Knitting. And you could sit and knit for the forces. All sorts of interesting things in here. Some quite strange, but there you go. But you could knit for yourself, of course. And this is a little fourpenny Best Ways knitting pattern. And it's made with 2-ply wool, which still had to comply with government restrictions. This is Peyton's and Baldwin's, and it was restricted on the colour tinting that they supplied. And of course, these skeins, you needed somebody to sit like this. I suspect there's many a gentleman here that sat there with his arms out. When's it going to come to an end? Well, you wound that up. You needed your Bakelite needles. And when you got your wool all wound up, you put it in a Bakelite. One of these. You just unscrew the bottom, put it in, and it's also got a needle gauge around the bottom. And you can put it on your wrist so as you knit away, your wool is out of blistering. Not that to be chewed by a cat. Well, the pattern made this jumper. Notice how it's still got its square shoulders, no shoulder pads, but you can actually quite get away with that today. It's a lovely jumper. Now, there was a ruse you could have. So you didn't have to use coupons for your wool. You could buy darning wool, which came in various shades, like your stockings, and it's 2-ply, and it's all in one long length. But the government soon realised that you were doing this, because once you'd knitted it up, you could dye it any colour you wanted. So they actually chopped it up into length. So if you wanted to knit with it, you had to join it all together. So that's your darning wool. And you did, of course, darn your socks and your stockings and your gloves and everything else. So you needed your either wooden darning mushroom or your Bakelite mushroom. And this one unscrews and you can keep your darning needles in there. This is an illustrated magazine. And on the cover, we have this wonderful lady in a 2-piece swimming costume, knitted. In this article, this is actually 1943, in this article it actually calls it a bikini. And it says that a bikini reveals everything about a girl apart from her mother's maiden name. Bikini. So, I suspect some of you have had a knitted swimming suit, haven't you? Well, they do strange things. They're wonderful while they're dry, but when you go in the water, they sort of whirl. I think the lady that wore this knitted bikini was very, very brave. She did knit it in moss stitch. she stayed on the beat. But if you wanted something on your head, of course, you could have hats. And hats, if you could buy them or make them, had no CC41 labels in them. So here we have one of my favourite hats in my collection. This lovely little hat. And they're just worn on the side of the head, and you have the veil pulled down over your face. They're very attractive hats. This one was worn for a wedding in 1942. Just straw with some artificial flowers. And this one always reminds me of Miss Marple. It's a sensible hat. So a nice felt hat with a few flowers on the side. So there's your hat. Now, of course, children needed clothes. And an article in the newspaper said that the health service advertised the fact that they would like their mothers to put them in start-right shoes, footwear for girls and boys, where start-right shoes were incredibly expensive, but of course they are very good shoes. And on the other side of this article here, you have a little girl in a siren suit from Swan and Edgar, and the siren suit, she's got a gas mask and everything with her, was 15 and 11, or 8 and 11 for a child. So they were the suits that Winston Churchill liked to work in, because they just put them all in one. Well, start-right shoes are beautiful. And here we have a beautiful little pair of start-right shoes. They're your little girl's shoes. We have draft shoes for a little boy. Aren't they lovely? What we refer to as sensible shoes. And then, of course, I suspect that many of you had these, because they were still being worn in the 1960s. They started out in the 30s, and they went all the way through the war, right up to the 60s. They came in white, brown, red and blue. And they had a crepe sole. And they were boys and girls. So, your little crepe-soled sandals. I doubt whether there was a single child in the country that didn't have them. Except, unless they were very poor. Some of the very poor children from the inner city slum areas didn't possess vests or liberty bodices, and apparently they were sewn into brown paper vests at the beginning of winter and cut out when summer came, sometimes with a nice layer of goose grease underneath. These are the children. This is a lovely little matinee jacket made from a flannelette sheet. Yeah. So that was the matinee jacket. There we have the booties, knitted. And in their original bags we have, first of all, a lovely pair of lamb's wool mittens. These actually cost 1 and 11 pence halfpenny. They're incredibly expensive. But nice and warm, I should think. And these are the things that surprise me. Complete with the original bags, we have Bairnswear. Probably all heard of that label. Well, in here we have a little pair of rompers for a boy for 12 and 9 pence. And in the other one, we have a beautiful little hand smock dress for a little girl at 13 and 6pence. Why the difference in the price, I don't know, because he's got more buttons on his. And then, of course, you would want a school uniform. This is Bannerwear school uniform. Banner was often sold in the co-op store. So here's your Banner label, and it looks like tea table cloth gingham, but it's your school uniform dress. So that's your uniform. And you would have been very pleased to have had your nice felt leggings to keep your legs warm. These are the ones where you had to sit still while they did the buttons up and the button hook all the way down the side. And when you went to bed, of course, totally exhausted, you wanted a really glamorous nightie. Well, it probably looked quite nice when it was new, and the embroidery was bright. And it did have a belt, but it's been mended many times. Again, it's a Banner wear nightie. But you could, of course, make your own. And then the world was your oyster. You just bought yourself for 1 and 2pence a Weldon's pattern. As long as you complied with all the restrictions the government put on you, you can go out and you can buy your material. And it really is wonderful fabric. It comes in all different colours, but it costs you for 2 coupons a yard of cotton and 3 for a yard of wool. So don't squander it, but that's enough to make a couple of nighties there. And that's your wartime nightie material. And you were carrying on making, doing, mending, even when Christian Dior gave us the new look in 1947. Now, Christian Dior's new look, and this is the famous picture taken by a very famous wartime photographer called Willie Mayward on the cobbled streets of Paris. His skirt had 2 full circles of fabric in it and was now 10 inches from the ground, which was amazing. You had no shoulder pads, you had nice sloping shoulders. The models had their skinny waists cinched in even further, but he had to put hip rolls on them because the skirts wouldn't balance on their skinny hips. So there's your beautiful new look by Dior. And within a few days, all the stores had them in their windows. And they sold like lightning. And this is the high street version of the new look in this wonderful rayon fabric, which sounds like a nice rusty silk. But we only have 1 circle in the skirt. But it does come with a stiffened petticoat underneath. And of course, very soon you can start wearing it with those lovely, fluffy net petticoats. So your new look dress, and very fashionable navy blue and white. And you want to wear with those dresses your new look shoes. And here we have your new look shoes. Black velvet, gold kid, and you could wear them today. Got no sides to them. Very fashionable heel and peep toes. And on your head, you would actually need your turn-back straw new look hat. Almost the same as the one in the picture. So that's your beautiful new look hat. But of course, you're still making, doing, mending. Everything's still on ration. So what you're doing, you're cutting up scraps of fabric into long strips. And then you've got this strange gadget here. And a piece of sacking. And you're going to make a rag and and if you make it properly, this is really the right side, that's the loopy side, but you can trim off the back and you could actually have it made reversible. Now, apparently by tradition, they're supposed to have black borders. Well, my great-aunt used to make a new one every Christmas. And one Christmas, she ran out of black 3 inches from the end of the border. But her brother was home from the Merchant Navy and he was wearing black socks. She did knit him some new ones before he went out. But that's your rag run. And while you're doing that, maybe you're listening to your wind-up gramophone. And here we have a Decca record with Ambrose playing Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. And if you get fed up with these records, they're shellacs, these records. You can pop them in the oven on a very gentle heat and make a nice fruit bowl or a flower pot. Thank you very much.
That was a wonderful, wonderful march down memory lane there, I'm sure for a lot of people here. And what a contrast to our throwaway society today. All that making something out of something else. It's becoming a little bit more fashionable, I think, now, but I don't think many of us would sit down and make coats out of blankets anymore. It's been wonderful. And I'm so impressed there's so much there left and in such wonderful condition as well.
Well, because it was so beautifully made and the quality of the fabric, it had to be of a good quality because they were determined it was going to last. The whole idea of the CC41 scheme was that with the coupons they issued you, you could actually buy a whole year's wardrobe in clothes, so it's going to last you a year. Can you imagine that now?
This is a bit different from the Primark.
It was very difficult.
Yeah.
But if you were taller or you had bigger feet or you were larger, you did get extra coupons.
So that was very practical. Well,
I
thank you.
think they want to
May we
see
come and
you.
look at all these articles? May we come and look at all
Yes,
these?
of course you can.
Well, thank you. On behalf of everybody, it's been an absolutely fascinating evening. I'm sure we really all enjoyed it very much indeed. Thank you.